But I want to talk for just a minute about this idea of food justice. I don't put some pressure on you. For me, this is actually goes a long way back because I was, my family was one of those that moved in the 70s out to the rural area to, you know, be part of the land movement back in the 70s. And actually they came up across something that I think that happened to a lot of people, where the land prices went up. The food prices and your ability really to do a hobby farm, which was kind of a self-sustaining lifestyle. So at that time, their vision was for this family with 6 kids to raise their own food on. So we had all the animals and a big garden and everything. And it was not sustainable as one family to do it. It wasn't sustainable. All around us were larger, small farms, 80, 100, 200 acres that were more monocropping it, and they were barely getting by. But it really was a time when there was a huge decimation of actually small farmers. So for me, this is a particularly important issue because it brings kind of my life 35, 40 years later kind of full circle to think really about, you know, we've used these words about food justice, but really to think about how is it that we can have the food that sustains us be part of something that sustains society. This is this larger, bigger question. And I guess that on some level is my food justice question, which I won't get there until we talk for a minute about who you are and the organization you work with, and then we kind of jump right into that. So.
Thank you. I'm Reginaldo. This is Dave Nicholson. He's from Headwaters, and he's the organizer. So anybody already introduced themselves. But so here's the organizational scoop. I came to Minnesota in 1992, August 2nd, and first person I met was a woman named Karen Lemon. You probably heard of her. She's in the food movement, and she introduced me almost within days to Neil Ritchie, and then from Neil to Mark Ritchie, then to Larry, and to all these other people, and very soon it became a very large network of support. And that's sort of what I have gone back to after playing around with a lot of other ideas and learning to live in this country, back to food. That's what I came from. That's what we struggle with. That's my biggest fear in life. We all have fears, you know. My biggest fear is being without food because we grew up without it and it doesn't feel good. So that's my background here. Main Street Project works on social media, community organizing, and economic development. And so economic development is my area, and food and agriculture is our focused strategic approach to economic development. Why? Primarily because we work with Hispanic and other minorities at this point, but primarily Hispanic minorities, and food and agriculture as the place where most of them are conglomerated around. So in general, that is the scope of the work. I don't know if you gotta give me some scope of time here so that we don't.
No, don't worry.
Because you just wanted to do an introduction of the organization first, right?
No, that's.
Yeah? Can I keep going then?
Keep going. Keep going.
David, you have to give him limits, otherwise he will.
I got my jammies. I'm ready. I'm ready.
So see, I came into this from a very different perspective, obviously. I mean, I'm from Guatemala. We look at most issues differently than people in the US. Most of the decisions that have been made here only affect us more than benefit us in third world countries. So when I started looking at how folks are approaching food, sustainable food systems, and agricultural systems, and all of that, I was puzzled by the non-continuity of the equations that are being proposed. So you mentioned one of those equations, you know, get back to the farm and start doing all kinds of things. Well, guess what that does? It gets you very busy, day in and day out. I mean, 24-hour, 24/7 busy. But when you add up what you have produced, and you compare that to the context of food and ag and people who need food and the amounts and all of that, it really doesn't, once you scale that up, in theory, it doesn't work, and in practice, a lot of people are broken because of that. So that equation didn't quite match my training in agriculture and my understanding of how the systems work. So back in 2007, I came back to Neil after some time of not working in this specific area with my other colleagues, and And I said, listen, I believe we have an opportunity because of what you said. It's not like this was a new idea, but 10 years ago we were thinking about this. When I was back in Guatemala before 1992, I was thinking about this. But when you looked at the marketplace, fundamentally, I didn't see much people giving much of, about where the food came from. It is until recently that people started to wake up to the fact that it's killing us, what we are eating. And then started to take off, and more of this movement started to grow, fair trade and social justice, and on it went, to the point that back in 2007, I had this feeling that the movement was big enough to support some new thinking. New thinking, not like outside of our realm of common understanding, but within a context of reorganizing how we are approaching stuff, and starting from the market backwards and understanding the whole system. So to give you an idea of what I did in 2006 before we came up with some new propositions, we looked at the whole state. I don't know if you're familiar with the National Agriculture Statistics Services, and they produce every 10 years, I believe, a census of agriculture. The larger context of this, when you look from those eyes, you see a lot of minority farmers, supposedly, right? So you go deeper into looking at where those farmers are, and you can never find them. It looks like somebody made them up. In Michigan, they had similar experiences where there's a lot more minority Hispanic farmers, but you can't find them. The same in Minnesota. So I did that exercise, and then we started looking at other studies that had been done. Well, at that point also, the Rural Policy Research Institute was studying a regional 38-county scoping mission to identify economic opportunities for the region, southern region of Minnesota. And to make the story short, 16 months later, what they found out was that food and agriculture was the second most important economic opportunity and economic development opportunity for the region. One. Healthcare was actually the most important from the dollars perspective. But food and agriculture was the second most important in the larger context of the dollar traded, and the most important, number one, in terms of jobs created. But also they pointed out in the final report that it was the sector that produced the most jobs and the least return in wages and benefits for the whole region. So that gave us a very immediate clue. I was looking for clues on what the landscape looks like. So what we did was we'll go deeper into, okay, so who are those folks that are populating the labor market? And technically speaking, that was just code language for saying that they go home poor. And if you live in poverty, you got your life limited. Your participation in civic life, economic life, social life, everything is limited if you live in those conditions. So if that's what it says in the context of food and agriculture, then who are the most affected by it? A quick scan, you don't need to be a sociologist to figure this out. You go to the fields, you go to the factories and all that, and what you find is over half of the workers there are Hispanics and other minorities. Now, if you go further, then you look at the state statistics, you realize that us Hispanics are about 21% poor compared to 9% in the rest of the population. And we are way down in the distribution of wealth as is being recently documented. I think it's 1/3. It goes from 1, 2, and 3 from Hispanics, African Americans, and whites, as in how much wealth is distributed per each sector. And many other statistics that show us the general conditions. So what we said was, is there a way that we could take the most important component of a sustainable food system, which is people? Let's not get bogged down with birds and trees and the water and all that. It's critical, it's important. But the most important component of a sustainable system in the food and agricultural sector is people. People who consume the products because they are even unable or don't have the time to produce them, and the people who produce them because that's what their vocation calls them to do. And if you look at the Hispanic population, up to 70%, according to our informal research, shows that that's what they want to do. While that's what they want to do, also they have the most assets in the context of cultural background, training, experiences, desires, vocation, all of those things associated with sustainable systems, small scale but still scalable approaches to rearranging that formula that we're talking about. So technically, we have food demand over here that wants better products, and we have a very large population that can't do it, and instead we squander it by forcing them and structurally limiting them to just laboring in our factories for minimum wage and going home poor, and isolating them from participating in community life. That's why I like Main Street Project's mission, because that is the foundation of it, is to go out in a community and make it possible so people can fully participate in community life. And this is one way of saying it, and this is one way of approaching it. Okay, so the question then was, is there a way that we can rearrange the flow of everything that happens between the production, the farmer, the farm worker, the landowner, whatever it is that that structure looks like, with the consumer on the other end, and the chains in between? But that whole process needs to be based on some higher level sort of understanding of what is it that we are trying to accomplish, right? For many purposes, from the justice standpoint, economic justice, from the social justice, from the community organizing standpoint, from the economic flow of the flow of the economy, all the way to what is food in the first place. If food is the end goal and that is the final purpose, what does it look like if we were to go bare bones to what is sustainable? And that's where one of our basic propositions comes from. Here's fundamentally what we are talking about when we look at it in that perspective. On one side, you got energy. You break it down to its smallest component, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, and all of the elements that go into this other next step is all energy, and the bottom line. You take that and add new energy, water, wind, the sun, and all of that, and a process of transformation, which we put a line and put T underneath. And that process of transformation is really all what farming is about. Everything, farming and everything, this place here is a process to transform that energy so that you can take it out of your plate and put it in your mouth. So the energy is really the centerpiece of all of this, and coincidentally, money follows the energy. So if we can balance out the energy equation, we balance out the money equation, and if we can then put people first, we come up with a very sustainable system.